Yes. 15 tapes on a dead man's deck. Yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. Truly the finest plunder of the sea. Oh, hello! Didn't see you there. I'm just a midships-only boat, exploring the wonders of the undersea world that can be found in the Texas Instruments 99 4A. From Blackbeard's treasure to the briny depths of Atlantis and the mythological creatures of Fathom. Now you may be wondering, why am I exploring undersea in a Popeye the Sailor hat, yet talking like a pirate? The answer is simple, my land-lubbing friend. This show has a very low budget, and we already had the hat. To the war room with ye! Ew, I think this isn't gluten-free.
Miller's Graphics did a lot of great things for the TI 99 4A community in the 80s. Their graham cracker hardware unlocked the code on cartridges, which led to their distribution on disk and made them available for online file transfer. Their Smart Programmer newsletter and Smart Programming Guide for Sprites publications guided a generation of extended basic coders looking for solid information after TI left the computer market. And Night Mission was an innovative game packaged with a programming book that broke down how the game worked as another valuable coding tutorial. They got all that experience with sprite graphics by coding games earlier in the decade, including 1982's Blackbeard's Treasure. The concept here is simple. Dive off a boat, avoid sea life, pick up treasure, return to boat. It's basically Frogger gone aquatic. But not only is it a great-looking game screen, the underwater setting adds a savvy element that only sprites could provide. You don't stop and change direction on a dime. You drift to a stop, sometimes too late to avoid becoming shark bait. And how cool is this? In the game instructions, you get a little movement practice session. Now there's a real finesse, especially on the higher levels, to glide past those sharks without overcorrecting. It almost feels like driving on ice. The physics just make sense. You're not fully in control of the diver when they're at play, but in a way that adds realism and makes you adapt your strategy. Even in 1982, Miller's Graphics had an intuitive sense for leaning into the way TI sprites worked in Extended Basic and making the game respond accordingly. Little touches like your treasures dropping back to the ocean floor when a shark gets you on the way back up are just icing on the cake. And notice how you slow down and your feet drag a little on the ocean floor, and how you rise up slower when you're burdened with your plunder. It all adds to the strategy of your gameplay. That sense of real-world physics can either make or break any game with motion, from sports titles to pinball tables. And it really sets Blackbeard's Treasure apart from most of the Frogger-type point A to point B clones. And did I mention how good it looks? I mean, look at this. It has to be said again. Miller's Graphics knew their way around some sprites. This is just a fantastic-looking game. And it's still a lot of fun. It runs in Extended Basic with no memory expansion, and it loads from cassette, making it well worth seeking out, even if you don't have an expanded system. Fathom is one of the late-era Imagic titles ported to the TI-99 4A and released just as the computer was being clearanced off store shelves in late '83. Imagic's emphasis on graphics in its attempt to be the next Activision made for some astounding-looking games, including Moonsweeper, Super Demon Attack, and the unbelievable Microsurgeon, a game that didn't even look possible on the TI-99 4A based on what had come before it. Fathom is a really simple concept dressed up in some mighty fine mechanics. You transform yourself into a bird or a dolphin, and you pick up clouds and seahorses, which then reveal pieces of a magical trident. Before your energy runs out, you have to swim down to the ocean floor and free the mermaid trapped on a shipwreck, guarded in later levels by an evil octopus. Your biggest worry is getting through the absolute mosh pit of birds and sea critters that dart back and forth and will knock you for a loop as you try to get to the clouds and seahorses. You have to pick up 2, 3, or 4 on a screen depending on the level, and if they bump you up or down to the next screen, you have to come back and start over even if you had all the pieces a second ago. Like I said, by itself, not the most innovative concept to hang an arcade game on. But when you add in the questing elements and you start getting the hang of the bird flapping and how it differs from the dolphin swimming, and you start really stressing out about that energy level dropping down to 0, the whole thing starts feeling kind of epic. In later levels, the volcano starts spewing fireballs, an evil octopus patrols the sea near the shipwreck, and the game map gets bigger, forcing you to cover more ground or water, air, before your energy runs out. Add in seaweed that hinders your progress, and you've got a recipe for frustration and a game that requires both dexterity with the joystick and a lot of thinking on the fly. Okay, I'm sorry, no more bird and fish puns. In higher levels of the game, you get crabs and sharks and screens full of seaweed and seahorses where you're trying to get through a thicket of crap just to get your trident pieces. I'm not going to show you any of that here because this isn't a full playthrough video, and also because I'm not that good at this game. But there are some full playthroughs of all 9 levels out there, and if you've never done more than flap around level 1, those are worth your time to check out. The graphics on Fathom are just gorgeous. Some of the best early era screens this platform got treated to, if you ask me. The kind of graphics that make you wish everybody had that same standard. Imagine having dedicated graphics people who designed these assets for all their platforms at once really makes a difference, and that extra level of finesse really sells the game and adds to the overall experience. Much like the opening screen of Microsurgeon with the cutaway look at the human body, the shipwreck and volcano in Fathom are jarring first impressions. They really build the world for you and set you up for an exciting game. Now, in a perfect world, I wish we had gotten official ports from Magic of Atlantis and Cosmic Arc, and I would love to see a TI version of Demon Attack that plays and acts more like the 2600 version. But it's really hard to be mad at a Magic's contribution to the 99.4a catalog. Microsurgeon might be a more complex and original game idea, but in my opinion, Fathom is just their most fun game. It's hard not to imagine that games like Echo the Dolphin later on weren't influenced by the smooth animation and fluid motion of the plucky undersea hero that we control in Fathom. And that brings us to Atlantis, and back to the world of cassette games and TI Basic. This was actually one of the first UK tapes I ever got a hold of, and one of the few games that loaded its data in a separate file after you loaded in the main program. That means that on a cassette system, you're looking at almost 10 minutes of load time before the game fires up. And it meant that for disk users and people transferring files online for emulators, this game was a lost treasure for years. Thankfully, somebody with more skills than me also had a copy of it, and it's out there now to be loaded with relative ease in Classic 99 using the mini memory module. Just to avoid confusion, this is not the same Atlantis I just mentioned that was released by Magic for the Atari 2600 and other platforms. We recently got a compiled homebrew version of that game, which is a welcome addition to the library. But this Atlantis came from Intrigue Software in 1984 and was programmed by Martin Webb, a teenage prodigy who released about a dozen TI games through Intrigue before moving on to famously design the Commodore 64 port of Outrun. Vibe-wise, this game shares some attributes with Fathom, and also with adventure arcade hybrids like Pitfall 2. You travel across multiple screens, plunging to frightening depths, picking up pearls and diamonds, avoiding fish and coral, and ultimately searching for the tomb of Atlantis and its secret. What is that secret? I really wish I could tell you. Between the load times and the average length of each game, I have not played this game nearly enough, and I don't think I've come even close to stumbling across the Lost City. If I ever do beat this game, you can bet I will be bragging about it here on a future episode. Atlantis is the only one of our 3 underwater games today where oxygen is taken into account. You can top off by returning to the surface, but if you want to reach the maximum depths and live to tell the tale, you'll have to find oxygen bottles along the way. Each collision with a fish or the coral will cost you an energy points, and if either your energy or your air meters reach 0, consider yourself lost at sea. Basic is all about trade-offs for speed and memory. Each time you exit one screen, it takes the computer a while to render the next, giving you a moment to catch your breath. Once your diver reappears, you're moving until you stop. The controls are simple. Turn left or right, start swimming, or stop moving. I recommend a lot of stopping while you're trying to learn to make turns and navigate around the swimming fish or get to the diamonds and pearls scattered among the coral. You're going to bump into a lot of stuff, and each bump is going to cost you. Now, I've talked before about the atmosphere some of these basic games can evoke with the simplest sounds and graphics. Khe-Sanh, for example, evokes the apprehension and uncertainty of a hidden enemy by showing almost nothing at all on screen. Similarly, with expanses of blue, a depth meter, and some increasingly narrow passages among the coral, Atlantis really gives off that claustrophobic sense of dread, knowing you're too far below the surface to make it back up in time for air, and pushing on to find that last-minute salvation of an oxygen bottle in the murky depths. Even the minor inconvenience of the rendering time between sections works in the game's favor eventually. It makes the world you're traversing seem massive, a whole ocean of danger and darkness, with only the hope of riches and discovery keeping you pushing onward. And it's another amazing-looking game, with an inviting playfield, great animation of the diver and fish, and a visually pleasing layout. For some people, the limitations of a game like Atlantis will always be too much to deal with. But if you're a basic game fan, and you love the idea of exploring a big virtual world seen by a hardy few, this is an adventure you gotta check out. I cannot overstate the magnitude of Martin Webb's technical achievement here, making this game work at all within the confines of an unexpanded TI-99 4A. Exploring game worlds like this and chronicling their mysterious depths in the modern day is one of my favorite things to do down here in the War Room. If this stuff is up your alley, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button to let us know you're here. And if you ever played Atlantis or games like it on the 99 4A, back in the day or over last Christmas break, share your story in the comments. We're all in the same pirate crew down here in the War Room. We'll see you next Friday.